Siamo oggi al Quadraro in compagnia di Gary Baseman, uno dei più grandi maestri del pop surrealismo. Hi Gary.
Hello.
Chi è Gary Baseman?
Who is Gary Baseman? I'm a artist from Los Angeles, California. I was born and raised in Hollywood. I'm a painter. I have two exhibitions right now, one in Mondo Pop in Roma and one called Vicious at the Antonio Colombo Gallery in Milano. And but I'm also a toy maker. I am a TV show creator. I created an animated TV show for Disney and ABC. I do art performances and I collaborate with fashion designers and musicians. So I see myself as what I call a pervasive artist. In English, pervasive meaning art that is perceived everywhere. So that's an introduction of who I am.
So che non ti piace essere definito il maestro del pop surrealismo. Che cos'è allora per te il pop surrealismo?
Yes, I don't personally like the term pop surrealism, but I'm very grateful that the people in Italy have such a strong love for the what they call pop surrealism, something that is I think was born, and just like I was in Los Angeles, in the very, so that type of art is something that I'm known for. But for me, I don't like the term because I feel like it's too limiting to what art and the kind of art that I do and the other artists that I know do. The idea of describing this art that it's about popular culture and that it somehow has a reference to the surrealism movement is too superficial. Because for me, pop art had to do with the love of popular culture, and they took it directly and found a way to deconstruct it onto a canvas. And surrealism for me, which is also a very important art movement for me, was all about the human condition and the sense of desire and sensuality. But for me, the art that I create isn't an homage to any of those movements. To me, art today needs to speak about the times that we're living in. And so for me to understand the human condition of the world that we live in today, we have to understand who we are and how we can use all different technology and different approaches to get out our message. And so for me, that's why I'll use television, I'll use art performance, I'll use through products or sculpture. I used to, from magazines to any approach to be able to create art.
Gary Baseman oggi incontra la street art. Qual è il comune denominatore? Che cos'è che vi lega?
Well, for me, there is a movement out of street art, of a lot of artists, and quite a few are my friends, like Shepard Fairey or the London Police or Ron English, who have gone out on the street to put their message out. For me, there's a romanticism of what street art is, and street art where it's created without sanctioning from the government or from the public. But now street art has become so mainstream that now the city and state and people are happy to have artists come and put their mark onto the landscape to kind of like brighten the world and to be able to get across messages. And for me, it's street art is public art. And public art's been around much longer than even street art. And so for me, I was invited to paint this wall in commemoration and to make a message. So this isn't just a design, but I'm creating something that has a message and a story. So.
Cosa ti ha spinto a voler realizzare una delle tue opere qui al Quadraro?
I have a strong affection and love for Italy from the first time I came out almost a dozen years ago to be in the Gallery of Modern Art exhibition. And from that, I developed a strong friendship, like with Mondo Pop in Rome, when I did an event about 6-7 years ago. And from there, I've been doing events with them for many, many years. When they asked me to paint this wall, I was more than happy to, again, any excuse to come out to Italy and to enjoy the culture and the food and the wine and the people, the girls, and did I say that? Did you hear that? And the history. I think Rome is the most beautiful city in the world, and you can't help but come here and immerse yourself into everything, you know? So it's very emotional and very fulfilling to be here.
Oggi sei qui al Quadraro, un quartiere ricco di storia e autenticità. Quali sono le emozioni che ti ha trasmesso questo quartiere?
Yeah, when I've been invited to come here to the Quadraro, for me it was an honor, and because it's so rich with history and something I could easily relate to. Like normally with my art is also generally very playful and sometimes silly and sometimes a little naughty, you know, and like I have my little character Toby, who's the keeper of your secrets. And so with my art, I love to inspire and have fun. But coming to the Quadraro, and here, somebody grab Toby, was a time for much more of a serious reflection and a moment. And knowing and learning about the history here, about how in 1944, during the Second World War, that about 900 to 1,000 people were rounded up by the Nazis and taken away from their homes for no other reason, for their beliefs or ideals, and taken to slave labor, is a very ugly time that needs to be remembered. And the irony, in a way, well, for me, in a sense, is that it wasn't just here. It was pretty much not just in Europe, it was pretty much in the world. And most of my friends have grandparents that lived during that time, and that people had to make very difficult decisions of survival. For me, my parents had me later, so I was like an accident, like a mistake. And so actually my parents actually lived through the war. And so for me, knowing the story of the Quadraro and wanting to create some kind of art in remembrance was also a way for me to create a piece of art to have remembrance of my own family and my father. And actually this is a picture of my father during the war. So even though I was born in Hollywood, in LA, on Sunset Boulevard, and grew up with Disneyland and, you know, TV and movie stars, and my parents had a different upbringing. Both my parents came from Poland, so they actually grew up in what was once Poland. It's now part of the Ukraine. Stalin changed the map. But they lived at a time that was much, much, much more difficult. So both my parents are Holocaust survivors. Both my mom and my dad. Both of their parents were murdered. And in fact, when I was invited to do this wall was when I was doing research, because I planned to go to the towns of my parents. So I was already working on these thoughts. And so I found out more and more information about what happened. Because even though I grew up with my parents and they let me know about how the difficulty of their time, I actually did more research and I learned even more. You know, because when my parents left after the war, they came to America. They wanted to instill in their children a sense of a new beginning, of a new birth, and they didn't have to live with the pain that they went through. So for me, they actually had me grow up in a sense that living with a sense of democracy and freedom, that I could be and do anything I wanted as long as I was a hard worker and a good person. So, but my father passed away 2 years ago, and he lived a very long life. He lived till 93, so he survived a lot from the war. More than survived and had a life. And so even though he told me stories of survival, I actually just recently learned new information about my father that I had no idea. And also in this thing, I will tell you, even though this piece of art looks kind of abstract, there actually is meaning to every element in here. So my father came from a town called Bresna, which actually was hit harder than even this neighborhood. It was my father grew up in a town called Bresna. My grandfather grew up in a town called Bresna. And my great-grandfather, which I didn't realize there were so many generations. And it was pretty much 80% Jewish. In 1942, when the Germans came in, they rounded up all of them, about 3,000, and they put them in 3 buildings. They put them in slave labor, and then they had them dig a hole, and they killed everyone except for maybe 100 to 150 that were able to escape. And my father, in this picture, escaped into the woods and spent 3.5 years in the woods fighting as a partisan in the woods of Poland with Russian paratroopers. So this is a story that I already knew. My dad did tell me how he went through the river and found the Russian paratroopers, and how he asked them if he could stay with them, and they said no. And he said, well, if you don't take me, then you should shoot me now, because they'll kill me. Okay. I'll be okay, I'm cool. But so they ended up taking him, and he spent 3 years from a man I think my grandparents had a bike shop. But he learned to become a soldier. And this is something that I kind of knew. But now doing research, because I plan to go back. So I looked at the town that my parents are from, and now the percentage of Jews is actually 0. The Jewish cemetery where my great-grandparents were buried, all the stones are gone. And there's no remnant that a Jew has ever lived in that town. But I still plan to go there. I want to be able to walk through the town. I want to be able to smell the air, taste the food, touch the dirt. Now, while I was doing that research, I learned even more information. I found from a distant cousin that there was actually a book about the town, and that my father was actually mentioned in the book. Not just mentioned in the book, but he was mentioned of how he was able to take revenge for the death of his parents, which he never told me. Which still, to this day, in my sketchbook, I'm trying to write and understand why he would not mention this. No, and in some ways, I think he was trying to protect me, because he wanted to teach me about survival and where he came from, but to look for the future and not what he had to become to be able to move on. So, in the book, and it was in Yiddish, and I don't understand Yiddish, just like I don't understand Italian. So, I was able to get it translated. And it tells a story in 1942. My father comes back to his town. And He finds out his parents are killed, and that all the other Jewish brethren were murdered. And in the town, there was many Ukrainian commanders and people around. It was not a very safe place, but he found the 3 men that was responsible for the death of his parents. And I hear 2 versions of the story. One is that they were found shot dead on the outskirts of town. Another one, I was told that my father was able, and ironically I'm wearing knives, but he was able to kill the people who killed his parents with a knife. When news came out of what happened, because many of the Jews, after going through such hell, saw this as some kind of redemption, that what my father was able to do. The other Ukrainian commanders heard the news also and put him and his friend in the Rovno prison and sentenced them to death without a trial. And somehow, and I guess I'll never know, he either escaped or he was somehow let free. But that I don't know. But my dad was a man of great charm and cunning, that he told me about how he was able to move through all the camps and through the forest for survival. And actually, now we come to the M.U.Ro. Okay. And the rain is appropriate for today for us to paint this. So to understand what we're doing in this neighborhood and the remembrance, I thought was very important in a way, from knowing what my story is, or my father's story, to knowing what happened here in the roundup. And so, the funny thing was, I've been working on this figure. This is actually like a little, it's a designer toy, but to me it's a sculpture. And I created this character, this 3-headed deer. And I did this even kind of before I knew is my father's story. And before I even knew my father's story, just what I knew from just growing up, I wrote a folk tale about this particular deer. And so I use that as an analogy for his survival and also the survival here in Italy and all of Europe, of anyone who was able to survive. And so even though I know this story because it was only 1 generation away, our new generation, the 2nd generation or 3rd generation, can't forget what could possibly happen. How easily mankind could turn at any moment. Dealing with struggle just like now with the economy and things, and creating blame for people that maybe aren't to be blamed just because they are a little different, So what I created was this figure called the Buckingham Warrior. And he's actually going to be something that I'm producing that happens to be coming out this month. But what I did is I wanted to create something in honor of my father. And so the story is of a deer that lived in the forest. And how this land baron came in to want to take over the forest and take over the trees. And cut them all down. And the Buckingham deer said, no, I will go to him and explain that there's creatures living in this forest. He'll understand. He goes to the land baron. The land baron doesn't listen to a word he has to say. And he says, I want my best henchman, cut off Buckingham's head. So the henchman comes and cuts off Buckingham's head. But instead of Buckingham falling, 2 heads grow out from where he lost his head. The land baron looks and goes, your will is strong. So I will get a henchman who you lived with from your own forest to cut off your head. And that will kill your will. So he goes and he promises someone from the forest gold and survival if he cuts off the 2 heads of Buckingham. So the new henchman comes over and cuts off both Buckingham's heads. Buckingham still stands, and now 3 heads grow up. The land baron is so surprised, he goes, I'll have to do it myself. This time Buckingham, wanting to show no respect for the land baron, turns around away from the land baron. The land baron comes and takes his sword, and he cuts off 1 head of of Buckingham and sees that nothing happens. So then the land baron says, if Buckingham won't fall, make all the trees fall, and gets all his henchmen to go and cut off all the trees. When Buckingham hears that, he turns around, and when the land baron comes to cut off his other 3 heads, Buckingham this time grabs the arm of the land baron and this time forces the land baron to cut off his own head. And once his head was cut off, he falls and dead. And the other henchmen see what happens. They all left the forest. And Buckingham, seeing the destruction of the forest and that he couldn't trust any of the other creatures in the forest, he decides that he has to leave and find a new land. And I use that folklore as an analogy for my father. Little did I know of what heroics he actually went through in the war. So in that way, I wanted to use this creature, in a sense, to also stand in honor of those who survived and perished in this neighborhood. Also in here, and again, I use this through my art, through symbology, and also with little sculpture, little figures. They're called designer toys, but for me, they're little sculptures in this like Toby's Secret Society that I created. I also have these spirits, these what I call these magi spirits that represent something about each one of us. So I have like Veritas, which you can see is this little all-seeing eye, and Veritas I was using Latin, so which is truth. So he's our spirit of truth. Then I also have the spirit of Libertas, of freedom. And last that I wanted to have in this particular mural is Fides, which is trust. And this is where I drew trust with his head cut off, which represents that in this time, in 1944, where our trust in mankind was lost. And that's why I have him without the head. And I have these demons that represent the evil in all of us, those who you can say are our enemy, and those that are inside of us, those who either helped evil or those who did nothing. And so that's what I have for this particular mural.
Qual è il messaggio che vuoi inviare a tutti gli amici del Quadraro e a tutti coloro che verranno a vedere la tua opera qui al Quadraro?
Yes. The message I would like to give to the people in this neighborhood, or the people in Italy who would like to come to this neighborhood to see the art, is actually kind of the same message I try to convey in all my art. I've been very lucky and fortunate to. I've been an artist my whole life, and it's all I ever wanted to do. And since I've been painting and creating for so long, the one thing I've noticed that why I create art is a celebration of the beauty of the bittersweetness of life. So even though we need to understand the past, we shouldn't spend all our time living in the past. The goal in life for me is, instead of beating yourself up and worrying about perfection, is to understand the acceptance of yourself and who you are as a person. You know, always trying to be a good person, a better person, a fulfilling person, but the whole notion, and what I've done in many of my exhibitions, is try to inspire those to discover their true self. In a way, from when I had an exhibition called La Noche de la Fusión, which was the night of the blending and blurring. It was I wanted to create a mythical holiday when the walls of society came down, so we would discover, accept, and love our true self. So for me, the notion of everyone being able to not be victims or of society, of what people expect from you, and for you to be able to look deep inside yourself and to make yourself a better person and a more fulfilling person, and live that, and either through being an artist or whatever your love, if you love flowers, or if you love travel, or, you know, or helping others, or helping the needy. So for me, to be able to come and enjoy this art, or any art, you know, from here to, you know, just in life.
Michela Cossidente in compagnia di Baseman per HTO, il Murales del Quadraro, Roma.